You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And the Locked On Hawks Postcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Dougie Fresh says 6 minutes and you're on. We'll discuss the 6 minutes it took to start the season series and another new look Hawk at his coming out party tonight. We'll download on that. But first, let's talk takes on a game that saw the Hawks pull away for the 118 win over the Indiana Pacers. And you said your take was Hawks didn't beat themselves tonight, but yeah, they almost did.
Yeah, no, they definitely almost did. And listen, Tenitra, I think one of the first things is because we didn't see a Tyrese Halliburton on tonight. That's where things start for me, and I feel like that's a must win for the Atlanta Hawks, especially because, you know, you're playing at home. You haven't always looked the greatest at home, dropped some games at home that I thought should have been wins, could have been wins, and would have been wins if it wasn't for free throws and other things that we kind of get into talking about. Sometimes when we feel like they lose way too many games, leaving close games on the free throw line. But that's a large reason behind where they, you know, get their break starter from is from Halliburton. And far too many times last year, I feel like that there were instances as to where they were averaging about 150 points per game against us on last year. So, you know, getting the 118 doesn't feel nearly as bad. But saying all of that, I feel like the Hawks were still allowing just certain things to just happen. They weren't really closing out very well from a rebounding standpoint all the time, especially particularly in the first half. It just seems like Indiana was able to do whatever they wanted to do, but they just were the ones that weren't hitting shots. It wasn't necessarily something that Atlanta wasn't doing to keep the game within reach and keep it with, you know, balanced in that way, like it was until the second half. So, you know, I felt like it was right there for the taking, and that would have been this in the event that there was a loss. This would have felt like a much bigger loss than it would appear to be. I know everybody's going to go and look at the seeding, and Indiana's not that bad of a team, and so on and so forth for playoff experience. But honestly, I believe that it would have just been that much more upsetting because it's right there in front of your face, but you're refusing to take it from them, knowing good and well that if the roles were reversed, they would have taken it from you with no problem. So when I'm just kind of looking at all of those things, there were a few other keys to the game that I have here, and I'll let you go. But I just think that Atlanta got to a point where they refused to lose and woke up, you know, in the fourth quarter and said, you know what? I think we want to win this game. And that's what they went ahead and did. I'm glad to see that they kind of realized what they had in front of them.
Yeah, and I think for me, it would have felt a little bit tougher as well because you played this Indiana Pacers team just a little over a month ago. And you played this Pacers team in Indy, granted, but you played them with Halliburton and Benedict Mathurin, and neither one of them was available tonight. So if they were available a month or so ago and you only lost that game by 6, and that was on the road, my expectation is that you would win that game tonight.
You got to.
Them. So, yeah, that to me would have made it an egregious loss, coupled with the fact that the Orlando Magic just want to give you ground. And if they want to keep giving you ground like they did by losing to the Chicago Bulls tonight, you got to take ground when it's given to you. So, yeah, this would have been a tough one to kind of swallow because of those very reasons. And for me, my take was more of, and listen, there were a lot of runs tonight. And you know, I hate runs with all my soul because that just means, hey, you're going to score 12 or 14 while we don't really play defense. And then we're going to come back and score 17 while you don't play defense. And we'll keep doing this until the game ends. Just not my kind of ball, but it is what it is in the current state of affairs in the association. But there are some runs that I want to highlight. They're just going to sound a little bit different than the runs that you are accustomed to and that I just mentioned. So one of the runs I wanted to mention was Karis LeVert. Now, he didn't have a monster night like he's had in the last couple of games. He did not hit a game winner per se, but the reason I mentioned him is because he had a little bit of a run of his own at a critical moment late in the game where he was really good in transition. The Hawks were desperately holding on to that 5-point lead, and whether it was at the offensive end of the court or the defensive end of the court, he's really a big part of the reason that they were able to then extend their lead to 7 and ultimately win the game. Another run that I kind of liked was Onyeka Okongwu, who quietly ran away with this game. It was really quiet because we're not gonna, he's not our player of the game. We haven't really talked a lot and won't talk a lot about O tonight, but O had 20 points, 13 rebounds, 7 from the field, even a couple cool little assists, if I may say so myself. And he finished a plus 11 for the Hawks. And there was a critical moment in that fourth quarter as well, when both he and Niang, whom we'll talk about a little bit later, when the two of them were in at the same time. And I just thought it was very, very effective. So I wanted to give O his flowers for being a run in this game that I actually liked. And there's no run that I think you and I love more than we love a good bench run.
Yep.
Because anytime we see a good bench run, that just tells us that the Hawks are going to be able to take advantage of the depth that they're going to need in the postseason. So when you look at the fact that tonight that bench scored 50 points and the fact that this is consistent, you got to give the bench a world of credit because they're third best in the NBA. That's pretty darn impressive when you think about the fact that they're behind only the Memphis Grizzlies and the Golden State Warriors.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about the fact that this is a new look bench that we weren't sure how that bench was going to look with the departures of DeAndre Hunter and Bogdanovic. But I thought, once again, 50-point night. This is what they've been doing consistently. So I felt like they've been on a run, even in that game where the Bucks bench, I think, scored 40. The Hawks bench still scored 49, even in the loss. And the final run of the night that I loved was the run at the charity stripe. And say what you want about 78%. Yep, it ain't crap normally. But with the crappy way, the Hawks have not been able to take advantage of free money. I had to give them just a little bit of a tip of the hat for 78% from the free throw line tonight.
Nothing wrong with that, Tenitra. And listen, without that 78%, a boost from what it was at the end of the first quarter, where they were 40% less than Indiana was. They were shooting just 50% from the free throw line, which is absolutely atrocious. Without those free throws, and I hope they really understand this probably more than anything else, you end up losing that game on tonight. A game that we know you had to win, not just because you had to win it, not just because of where it could potentially put you in the standings with other teams losing, not just from a standpoint of confidence, among so many other things. But it's right there for the taking. There's not going to be many times you're going to play a team that's in the top four seeds in the NBA's Eastern Conference, and then you're able to beat them while still shooting poorly from the free throw line. You needed these ones. Excuse me, they were clutch and all that. And I'm glad that you mentioned something about Onyeka Okongwu, because when I go back and I look at one of the things that I thought there was the keys to the game where I felt like the Hawks really needed to win the front court battle on tonight. They probably didn't do a whole lot of that considering what Miles Turner, the combination between he and obviously Pascal Siakam did. But Clint Capella, while he didn't necessarily show up for the Hawks on tonight, Onyeka didn't really have a great first half. He came out in the second half and balled out. And guess what? When I talk about guys like Miles Turner, who has 17 points and 9 rebounds, so much of that contribution for Indiana was in the first half when Onyeka wasn't playing as well. So it kind of looks like one guy had if I'm going to have the better half, I want it to be in the second half where it kind of dictate the win-loss a little bit more. And I just really thought that they shouldn't get out in a track meet. Remember, we talked about the 150 points that they averaged against the Hawks on last year and all those meetings. They only had 12 fast break points on tonight. So I think the Hawks did a good job of slowing down the pace. And then last but not least, I'm glad that you mentioned something about the bench, because that was another key for me. They needed to force Indiana's bench usage into contributing. And I didn't really have a good feeling that if Indiana had to rely on the bench, that they would win this game. And in the event of all things, they actually didn't. And really glad to see that the Hawks put the clamps down and limited them the way that they did.
Oh, yeah. When you're talking about 22 points, less than half the production from the Pacers bench relative to what the Hawks bench was able to do. Absolutely right. They were like a non-factor. And going to your point about Clint Capella, yeah, didn't really get much out of him. 6 points, 5 rebounds, not a whole heck of a lot. But if you were to put all the front court players for the Hawks together, when you consider Gay and you consider Reese-Shea and you consider what they were able to do, and of course Niang, when you look from the 3 to the 5, then you get some quality play overall from the front court. And like you said, I think that's what ultimately allowed the Hawks to win the front court battle and allowed them to ultimately win the game, which they did with their bigs also calling game at the end, midway through the fourth quarter. So, okay, the bigs, we'll talk about that because that was our turning point, and we'll discuss when we return. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. So who's in your support system? We all need people to lean on, whether it's friends, family, mentors, or professionals. Even the strongest leaders and athletes know that asking for help makes them better. Now, therapy is one of the best ways to build a strong support system. It's not just for tough times. It helps with setting boundaries, developing coping skills, and becoming the best version of yourself. So learning to ask for help is a good look. I spoke to a friend of mine earlier today, and we were just talking about the weight that sometimes men have on them and where they might or might not have an opportunity to have an outlet. And when you have therapy, it gives you that opportunity to not just wait until a crisis happens and the weight becomes too hard to bear, but you can really talk about self-improvement, stress management, and navigating life's challenges almost every day, anytime you speak to your therapist. So you can build a support system with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
So at the 7:57 mark, Dyson Daniels hit a floater, tied up the game, right? Pacers regained the lead for a minute, but then with about 6 minutes left, Zachary Reese-Shea hit a 3, put the Hawks up 1. Georges Niang hit back-to-back threes. And for me, I think for you as well, that was pretty much game. And sidebar, it was impressive also because most of that time it happened with Trae Young on the bench. But yeah, Reese-Shea, Niang hit their threes, and that was pretty much a wrap.
How impressive it was to do that with Trae on the bench, too, I think is a big piece. Like, if we would have told you that someone was going to be storming back, for this team to put them in position to be able to take yet another lead, sometimes when it wasn't always looking that good. I mean, at the end of the first or to close out the second quarter, to close out the first half, Indiana went on a 14-3 run. When we start talking about guys that's going to allow this team to be able to come back, especially by double-digit deficits, typically Trae Young is the name that you're usually going to hear. To be able to see it from two guys who this is their first season in the Atlanta Hawks uniform, I think is something that's really, really good. And obviously, I heard you talking a little bit in the last segment before we got to this point and talking about the job that, some of those newer players have done. It just feels really good to see them do it collectively. Some people say, well, they don't really have a go-to guy on the bench, where typically DeAndre Hunter was probably that guy. You kind of gave the opposing team an opportunity to kind of prepare, do some homework, because they know what to expect out of the leading guy that's going to basically lead that second string. You can't really say that. You don't know if it's going to be Terrence Mann. You don't know if it's going to be Georges Niang like tonight. You don't know if it's going to be Karis LeVert like it's been the last few nights. So I think that while you may not necessarily be able to say that they have one, it's probably a really good thing that they don't have one either, because it makes it that much harder to prepare for. But those runs, game of runs that Tenitra just loves so much, I thought that was a big part of the turning point of the game, because it felt like every time somebody went on a run, nobody was really there to be able to keep their foot on the necks of the other team to prevent them from going on a run.
Agreed.
But there was that exact one that you opened up this segment with that made it really clear that Indiana's not going to be able to come back, and Atlanta just had too much going for them. Refuse to lose.
Yeah, I think I like the way you call that. It was a refuse to lose mentality that went all over the place. That was the turning point. But then once you get to that turning point, in order for it to be a turning point that ends up allowing Tate and T to talk about a win, you've got to keep going. Like, you have to keep going in every area. And I'll say one of the things I liked about tonight's game was I felt like that gave this team some momentum, some oomph, if you will, to say, okay, we got this. We can do this. We can close this game out. And we're having that closeout conversation in a good way more often than not this season. Don't let the 29-34 record indicate that the Hawks haven't improved on their ability to close out relative to doing so post Jalen Johnson. Because again, before Jalen Johnson went down, you and I came to this show many, many nights saying that, yeah, we had confidence. We figured that the Hawks could close out. Even if they didn't, we still had the confidence with him in the game being able to close things out. And I feel like now that's slowly starting to come back, as you mentioned, whether it's LeVert, Niang, or Mann in the mix. We feel like, okay, and of course, the stalwart for the entire season who's become 1B, and that's Dyson Daniels. But ultimately, those three guys stepping up so much over the last couple of weeks has been huge. But speaking of Jalen Johnson, he met with the media today for the first time since he was ruled out for the season on January 29th. And that's what we'll be talking about, the walking double-double.
This is what you'll be talking about.
Yeah, I think so too, DeShaun, because Jalen Johnson, when he went down on January 29th, it was like the wind got collectively sucked out of Atlanta because there was so much excitement about what we were seeing from him. And of course, his season ended with the left shoulder injury, which was a bummer because you're thinking, okay, that right shoulder was finally getting back to where it needed to be. And all of a sudden, here comes the left shoulder completely shutting things down. And what really kind of sparked that was the fact that, like I said, he met with the media today. We haven't heard from him since that injury. And when we go on courtside.nba.com, that's one of our sites that gives DeShaun and all of our media colleagues trend information. It doesn't always just tell you about the players that are playing. It'll give you trends on the players who are on these teams that would have been playing and could have hit a milestone. That said, the one that stood out for me, kind of made me feel some type of way, was Jalen Johnson needs 34 defensive rebounds to reach 1,000 career defensive rebounds. And it made me think, man, at least before the last couple of weeks, how many times could we have used that? So many moments could we have used that defensive rebounding prowess and him making his way to the 1,000 career defensive rebound mark. But Jalen said too, hey, this sucks for him. All he can do is just continue to do his rehab so that he can get back to this team and be better than ever next season.
I feel like there's just so many moments, and so a lot of parts of this is that, you know, it's a credit to the team of the fact that we always talk about how competitive they are and how much they're able to keep games close and so forth. You can't really help but to do anything but assume that a good percentage, let's just call it a good percentage, of those are going to be wins if you had someone like a Jalen Johnson, because we know what he's able to bring to the table. We know about how consistent he is. We know about his impact that he has on the game, on this team, his skill set, and all the different things that he can do. So, like, shout out to Jalen Johnson. I'm glad that he was able to kind of speak out a little bit and address a few things. Can't wait to see him get back out on the floor, you know, hopefully relatively soon at whatever point that may be coming in the next season, assuming. But, you know, I just think that some people don't really realize how big of a piece that is. Not everybody has a player like a Jalen Johnson that can impact the game in so many different ways and do so many different things, and still not even scratching the surface on what he could become in the future. I think that, you know, Jalen Johnson being vocal and being ready to, I think, like, there's a first step. Like, there's always that one thing when you have to kind of I don't know, whenever you're just kind of going through something, they say the very first thing to do is, admitting to something,
Yes.
verbally speaking on it. And I think that it's good to be able to see that we got that first step out of him so we can kind of carry on and continue to get prepared to seeing him back on the floor again at some point.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it helps to keep a fan base encouraged as well. You mentioned that Jaylen Johnson can do so many things. And yeah, we've heard in the league so much the last couple of years about those versatile bigs, right? And so we were looking for the last couple of years as well, like, are the Hawks ever going to get a versatile big like that? And Onyeka Okongwu certainly was giving us shades and glimmers of it, right? But when Jaylen Johnson showed up this season as a healthy Jaylen Johnson, we were like, there it is. That's the versatile big that the Hawks have been needing, that we've been wondering where that guy was, and that was him. So yeah, I think it encourages the fan base. I'm sure it encourages the Hawks organization as well to see their big, the versatile big, on his way back. But there was another thing that you noticed that was sneakily in the weeds that you said, you know what, this will be something that you guys will be talking about, and that is what keeps the Hawks winning. We know that they've had their struggles when it comes from making shots beyond the arc, but where they have not struggled is inside. The Denver Nuggets and the Memphis Grizzlies are the only teams in the NBA who have better averages, points per game in the paint, than the Atlanta Hawks. That's how effective they've been inside this season.
No, I always use that term, and I love to remind people, hungry, hungry hippo. Whenever you have put yourself in position, and especially when, and I don't know if this is Coach Quinn trying to fool us or not, but I even heard, I think it was halftime of the game before last, where I believe it was Terrence Mann that was being interviewed at the half and just saying, hey, we're going out there doing what coach is pretty much instructing us to do, and that's to get up a lot of threes. Yeah, but it's kind of like a reverse psychology kind of thing, at least I feel like, because they're just eating teams alive inside in the painted area between, obviously lobs that are being thrown. You don't know which way to go, whether that's going to Capella or whether that's going to Onyeka. Then there's instances when there is no lob being thrown and Trae's able to get into the teeth of the defense and be able to throw a floater. Then you also obviously have the instances where you have Onyeka Okongwu, who is, consistently developing and getting better, creating post moves for himself, being able to get into the paint and things like that too. So it's not just about the outside shooting. They've been really good from the inside instead of looking like a team like most NBA do, because we always talk about the NBA and all these narratives that there is about all these 3-pointers that are flying up there and so forth and what have you. That's why all the ratings are down, ... You're not seeing that as much out of the Atlanta Hawks. Instead of working from outside in, you're working from inside out. So the way that you stretch defenses with your shooting and get your teammates open is by being able to convert on shots and being very efficient offensively on the inside. And that's something that the Atlanta Hawks have been able to do. Just wait until we can add Jalen Johnson to that conversation. I can only imagine. What are we talking about? 74 points in the paint on tonight, something like that. It's hard to imagine that could be somewhere really close to 100 points in the paint on a night like tonight if you had a Jalen Johnson. Crazy to think.
Right. I mean, crazy to think, and just kind of scary to think about as well. But yeah, I think to look at the points in the paint from the Hawks, 74, as you mentioned, points in the paint for the Pacers, 46. Imagine how impressive that's going to be when the likes of a Niang start getting their flow from beyond the arc, because now you're saying, okay, this is a team that loves to play in the paint, so we're going to go chase them down in the paint. Because now you might have somebody who you can kick that ball back out to and make the three. So I'm excited for the Hawks because now they're looking like the versatile offense that Quinn Snyder can actually work with. So speaking of that guy who you can kick it out to and he can make that other team pay with 1:07 left in the game, he did that and then some before that. We'll talk about him on the other side. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. So why do people love using FanDuel's live betting feature? Well, because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. So whether you're backing a team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, never feel like you missed a chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
Man, oh man. So a minute and 7 seconds left in the game. He makes a driving layup, waves to the crowd because, hey, Georges Niang knew it was a wrap. And he also is our player of the game because he shot, so he pretty much shot lights out tonight. 10 of 15 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3. That gets you 24 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. I absolutely love what we saw because this is the player where if you're going to part ways with Bogdanovic, this is the player that you expect to give you the productivity that unfortunately you weren't getting from Bogey this season, at least from beyond the arc.
And I was going to say the exact same thing. You know, I mentioned something the other night where I'm like, you know what, the DeAndre Hunter thing was cool as long as it took us to get to that point, but it was cool for while it lasted. When you got someone like a live wire that can come in and score the ball in bunches, like a Karis LeVert, you know, that is that replacement for that particular player. And that's exactly what this is when you're looking at Georges Niang in comparison to someone like a Bogdanovic. Yes, whilst both are very much many cases liabilities on the defensive end, sometimes if we're just being really transparent, you can't deny what he's able to do on the offensive end. And I like how vocal that he is. And, you know, the eye for a shooter to be able to do it at the clip and at the rate of which he does. There's not very many times where I feel like he's releasing that ball and it's just not going to go in, even in the moments where it's not. Like there's just something about a pure shooter, the way that he does, the way he squares up, the way that he releases the ball, the flow, the whole nine. He's always in rhythm, things of that nature. It's just really hard to argue what he is able to bring to this team. And if you think back, we're talking about all the guys that can come in and contribute. We talk about the players that have recycled coming off the bench, which is exactly why it's as impressive as it is to see the bench doing what it's done, what it has done. The players have recycled. And when you look at who was the first one to probably step up for this Hawks team coming off the bench, where we know that was going to be critical considering the pieces that we lost, Georges Niang was the very first guy to come in and be able to put some points on the board for this team and give everybody an optimistic look at what the future could look like. Congrats to Georges Niang for being our player of the game.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely is starting to show those signs of why it is that the Hawks said, hey, we want him to be on this team because we need that difference maker. We need that guy who, hey, we can put in the game. And if we want to bring him in for 25 minutes, we can bring him in for 25 minutes and he can actually deliver you 24 points in 25 minutes. But I suspect they also got him because they know you can also probably put him in for about 10 or 15. And he'd still be just as good. Another thing that makes the Hawks so good and why she is our co-player of the game, and that is assistant coach Brittany Donaldson, who is masterful at helping the Hawks to be one of the best teams in the NBA as far as challenges go. So for the Hawks, they average about 66% of the time getting it correct. And you may not think that's a high clip, if you will, but 79.4% is the highest clip, by the way, with the Knicks. But ultimately, when you look across the entirety of the league, just about 44% actually have a success rate or started off there. And it's risen a little bit to right under 60%. But when you think 66%, it may not seem like that's a big deal. But DeShaun, when we're talking about challenges that end up being successful, and this is the case with the first challenge, or the second near challenge that was successful because she's call it, that's when you know how important it is with what Brittany Donaldson's able to do in games like this that tend to be close, and you don't want to lose a challenge or lose a timeout but if you lose the timeout because you won the challenge, that's one thing. Losing the timeout and losing the challenge, that's a whole nother ball game and a close game, because that could be the telltale for why you win or lose, but in tonight's case, why you win.
And that was something that was so critical, especially on tonight. And that's why I'm glad that we're showing Brittany some love here, because a lot of people don't know those different intricates or the different facets of the game and understanding the importance of what some of these assistants do and so forth. They are the extension of the coach, obviously, but everybody has the job. Everybody has a role, just like our everyday lives and anything else. So, when you start thinking about how on point you really have to be able to have an eye and make split decision in very short time span, and not having the opportunity yet to look above and see if it's something you should do or not, based off of, the replay may be lagging and not coming in right away. So a lot is being asked of you, trustworthy, a trustworthy person that, obviously is trained to be able to have an eye for certain things.
Right.
Should and shouldn't. What point of the game are we talking about? And during what possession, and trends of the game, and just kind of knowing and understanding after watching the game, how the referees are calling, games on tonight. All of these different things kind of go into it. So it is a big job, and I'm glad that she got that one, because she definitely helped save the Hawks a little bit on tonight. Also, helping catapult them to assisting them in getting a win.
Indeed, she is. So, hey, that's why we like to call her our co-player of the game, but a shout out to her during Women's Empowerment Month, Women's History Month, her making a big difference in this Hawks team when they are one of the most successful teams in the NBA as far as their challenges being successful. Well, just a quick shout out to the Hawks as well, because, hey, you won a game that you needed to win.
That's right.
And that you were supposed to win, because the Orlando Magic lost to the Chicago Bulls tonight. So, hey, when a team gives you an opportunity and kind of opens that door for you to make some headway amongst those play-in teams, you definitely have to do it. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And, of course, for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We'll see you next time.